Thank you so much for joining, guys. This webinar, what we are trying to do is, as we are coming closer to our current roadmap, 6 months roadmap plan, which would be ending in January 31st, we actually wanted to share or discuss with you guys on our next topics, what we are thinking of incorporating in our next 6 months roadmap, and wanted to get your feedback and priorities before we finalize the 6 months roadmap, which will be starting from February to July. This is what we wanted to discuss in this particular webinar. And we have 80 topics depending on the conversations with the community, depending on internally discussing, and we have come up with 80 topics, which is needed for Guardian in the near next roadmap or later. So what we would be doing in this particular thing is, this is a kind of like a part one phase of Guardian roadmap, what we would like to discuss with you guys, where we would be discussing the first 40 topics. And in the next tech meet, which is on Wednesday, again at same time at 11 a.m., we would be discussing the next part, which would be in the next 40 topics, just to make sure that we go in detail with each of the topics and get your feedback and views. And we would also be circulating the Excel sheet as we did in the last time, that, where you can actually add the priorities in that Excel sheet with the notes, and where you would like that particular feature to be incorporated, like whether it would be next 3 months or next 6 months or later to 6 months, whatever you feel we would like to get that feedback. So this is what the session is for today. So as we're already 7 minutes ahead, I would just like to go to the next slide. So just to give you a quick update on the community, as we have the discussions, weekly discussion with the community, where we have 241 members invited currently, where we have all the discussions happening for the Guardian. Next, just wanted to give you some metrics on the GitHub, as we have that open source GitHub repo. So currently, these are just the metrics for October 26th to November 8th, that we have 606 total clones of that our GitHub repo. And we also have 2,667 total visitors for our GitHub repo of Guardian. Okay, so what our next phase we would like to focus on? So we basically would like to focus on a couple of things. One is enhancing and expanding our capabilities. For example, as we have released some of the interesting features in this particular roadmap or previous roadmaps, we actually want to expand and enhance those features to incorporate more functionality into it. Also would like to improve our current UI experience, because we feel that the current Guardian UI experience needs some enhancements to it. So we'd also like to focus on that aspect. And then we'll also address some of the worker topics, from improving the functionality or new features or security issues, and also the user experience. We would like to now start with our worker topics, what we are planning to. So I would pass it to Andre to give an insight or a quick overview of these features, so that community is well aware of our topics. Over to you, Andre.
Thank you, Prina. We'll start in the order of, in no particular order. This ticket is about enhancing our policy and data diff functionality, or data comparison, but we call it colloquially diff, as technical users normally do for these kind of features. Policy and data comparison functionality to enable color blind, and just basically making it accessible for visually impaired people, because we have done this for Guardian UI for policy, for example, editing. All color coding is duplicated in shapes, different icons, for example, and so on. So even if you don't distinguish between, let's say, green and red colors, you can still see and understand the information that the Guardian system conveys by these colors. But for diffs, we haven't done that yet. So this is a requirement to fix that, captured in this ticket, can be voted on for the next phase. Next slide, please, Prina. This is a different kind of task. We have originally had mathematics implementation in Guardian only limited to Math.js library. Now in version 3.0, we've introduced statistics And there's also this calculation, we call it parameterization of the form data. And with that functionality, we introduced another mathematical capability called Formula GS library, which implements a significant number of common functions that are used in Excel. So someone familiar with Excel programming would be able to create statistics, for example. However, this still is not strong enough mathematically to create advanced statistical functions in Guardian, or innovative, something complex. And we've had community requesting, and we've to introduce something. We've researched and consulted various people, and it seems our language is the language of choice there, probably provides the most value for the time, but yeah, it needs to be done. So this ticket is dedicated to introducing this functionality. So next slide, please. Yes, this work topic is a handover from the previous considerations. It's optimizing the disaster recovery of Guardian to work to enable people not only to access and view and verify data that's been previously worked on in the Guardian instance that undergone a disaster and disappeared with all the data and so on. This functionality would make users restoring Guardian not the users, but administrators would restore guardians and enable their users to restart operation from the last save point in the policy. It requires modification to the policy language. It requires also policy authors to foresee the possibility of disasters and introduce those save points. And at save points, obviously, the internal state of policy execution would be encrypted and saved in the permanent storage. So when disaster strikes, one can recover that. Next slide, please, Prina. Yes, royalties. Yes, our as significant number, probably most significant assets that have been minted by Guardian are NFTs in their essence, in their block concept. And one of the most valuable things about NFTs, as generally considered, is the ability to generate downstream when it's resale and resale again, to generate automatic distribution of funds, and the royalties is what that is usually called. So basically the original creator or the issuer or maybe project developer, depends on the policy, would benefit from maybe in each resale transaction, maybe combining to the pool transactions, various other operations on on that NFT can generate royalties automatically and can be, forgive me, can be pre-programmed by the policy. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, I'm slightly under the weather at the moment. This ticket is about enhancing the experience. Sorry again. This ticket is about enhancing the experience of policy authors, their ability to quickly create or replicate methodologies, implement methodologies in Guardian policies. And it's at the moment, block configuration is basically a form in which you navigate, and it's too easy to miss an important field or something like that, or you'd have to refer to configuration or documentation, configuration examples or documentation for each of the fields. It would have been better if it was a wizard guiding a user through configuring of the block, and in the policy, it would it contains descriptions, build documentation in the Guardian. Also, it will, once a user selects and populates a field with a value, if this other fields depend on this value, in a sense that this value eliminates the need for these fields to be populated, or makes some field fields mandatory to be populated. All of that can be easily, that logic being expressed in the wizard, in the flow, and would simplify and probably eliminate most of the errors that we have seen bugging our own or your policies in Guardian maintenance team. Next slide, please, Prina. Yeah, this is also been requested multiple times. This ticket is about being able to import a policy from developed by somebody else into your Guardian instance and execute projects under the guidance of that policy, attesting to the fact that the policy that these projects are being executed under has not been modified from its original state, which is obviously convenient because obviously importing a policy effectively creates a new policy. But if the policy hasn't been modified or prevented to be modified in Guardian, it would eliminate one, I suppose, one review point for auditors. Next slide, please. This slide is more for those teams that are developing enhancements or customizations to Guardian. There's been multiple cases where some APIs that were used internally, something like a communication system between microservices, for example, or some API that one of the microservices used to transmit large chunks of data, because for example, if it's too big of a file, it's not possible to send it via messaging service. So it needs to be the messaging initiates the connection and then it gets uploaded internal. All of that happens within the architecture of Guardian. So if a team is developing extensions to Guardian or customizations, it would be great to standardize those APIs, and in the same way as we standardize and track the backward compatibility and deprecation for the public APIs of Guardian. Next slide, please. That's another ticket about enhancing the APIs. Currently, the APIs of Guardian that are exposed to third-party applications interfacing Guardian are on the level of the policy, and there is a scope for improving this, making combining certain number of API calls into those lower level detailed API calls in a more top level sort of common, more sort of business kind of operation, and making it simpler to use potentially. So this ticket is about doing that, researching, figuring it out, and implementing it. Next slide, please, Rina. Yes, so currently in Guardian, we have a block suggestion mechanism where when you're editing a policy or creating a new policy, we're introducing and your Guardian contains other policies there already, and this block was used in one of those policies, Guardian will know this and will see the context in which it was used and may suggest other blocks that have been previously used for policy creation with this block. This way assist policy author in not having to remember or search for it and so on. So there is it's quite complex right now. It goes through the policies and looks at there's a window that it looks at to compare what you've got in your policy currently, what other policies has, but it can be improved. It can show multiple options. It can enrich the information that it shows with the block, talking about why or how often this combination of blocks are used, and maybe even look outside of your Guardian instance without you explicitly triggering it to do, and maybe suggest policies that already somewhere out there that have that sort of already this chain of blocks similar to yours and so on. Yeah, so it's about enhancing this experience. Next slide, please. This is the evolution of policy chaining ticket. You can right now create a chain of policies. It's publish, subscribe kind of model. One of the chains in the policy chain, publishes a document, the other one looks for that document and reads it and processes and goes one way, but it is not quite the workflow, flexible workflow that a single Guardian instance provides for a policy users. So with this initiative, when it's implemented, it would be possible to create a kind of distributed policy. So with messages going between different instances, passing back and forth with comments, just replicating basically the experience of a single Guardian policy being used by a project developer across multiple Guardian instances and multiple policies. Next slide, please, Prina. Yes, so this is an enhancement to our early implementation of contract-based retirement operations. It's with the original implementation, we've ensured that the retirement operation, the queries to retire, and various balances offsetting is basically undisputably executed by smart contracts on Hedera, and there's proof of transactions and so on. So it's pretty good. However, it doesn't currently, obviously, Guardian has a view on this. And so long as you use Guardian, this view is up to date. But theoretically, those contracts, and it's been designed such that these contracts can be used from outside Guardian by authorized users, the other applications, other exchanges, and various other still unknown applications could be developed to deal with the asset matching and trading and then retiring some and so on, reporting on the retirement. So all of that is possible. But when that happens, Guardian as an application doesn't know that the state of the contract's changed. So we can either keep polling for the state or we can get notified. But the problem with that is that some of the operations for reading they cost funds, so they need to be optimized, and at the moment it's a manual operation. The user is required to refresh. Just bear in mind, at no point anything can get corrupted. If the state doesn't match, Guardian wouldn't execute an operation, couldn't, because smart contracts prevent it from doing so, and the operation will fail and report that your state is not up to date, so you know you need to click the button and update the state. But yeah, this is about enhancing the user experience, making sure that Guardian view of the state of the smart contracts that can be externally updated at any point is always up to date. Next slide, please. Yeah, this ticket is about solving some of the problems that we've experienced. Sometimes we had typos in the UIs. There's also potentially a need to translate Guardian UI into different languages. In order to solve these problems altogether, it would be good to create, also have a standardized terminology across, and maybe we would create a dictionary for Guardian and automatically maintained one as well. So in order to achieve this, we would need to first go some refactoring in Guardian code base, extract all the terms that we use in the UI that are user readable into a special kind of module, a file, which can then be spell checked. It can create, we can enrich it and enhance it with the documentation about a link, maybe provide links to the documentation, external documentation, and so on. And yeah, this is the ticket about improving kind of maintainability of the terminology in Guardian UI. Thank you, Prina. Yes, this ticket is a catch-all for various Guardian UI improvements, and we reach out to you, to the community, for suggestions of the things that you've experienced in Guardian UI that weren't great for you, or you found it difficult to navigate. Please ping us. We will create kind of a list of things to and undertake it under this ticket. Next slide, please. Okay, on-demand straight proof generation for critical Guardian operations. This chain provides a facility to generate state proofs, indisputable state proofs about the context of various operations. This ticket is dedicated to providing a convenient UI to the user to generate those when with regard to the situation in Guardian and various assets that Guardian has produced, particular Guardian instance or policy. We can figure out the scope of that as well with this ticket. Next slide, please. Next phase, notifications. So at the moment, users do get notifications, but there is no method of configuring those. You cannot, sometimes you could say, I only want to receive a digest of all notifications once a day, or I want to see a digest of non-important or not important notifications, but only the alerts I want to receive immediately, and so on. There's no facility to configure that in Guardian. If there is a notification, it's displayed in your UI. So this ticket is about introducing this configurable, flexible notification facility. Next slide, please. Yeah. So we've introduced the concept of tools. If you remember, there's policies, there's modules, policy modules, and there are tools. Policy modules are embeddable, reusable components of Guardian policies, but once you import them into the policy as a module, it becomes part of the policy. You can edit it, you can modify, and so on. Tools is a step further. You don't import the tool into your policy. You reference it in your policy. Yes, technically it gets into the policy, but it's a non-modifiable chunk of things. And the next one is obviously we've got a ticket we've just seen about immutable policies, not just modules of the policies. The tools are immutable modules of the policy. But there are a few issues currently with that because they are such a special concept in Guardian worldview. It's not fully integrated. We can enhance how these are things that are produced by tools can be marked as produced by immutable modules, not just general policy, for example. We can also display tools better in policy comparison, in project data comparison, and so on. There's also, yeah, we can't at the moment for policy authors, you can't use tools, draft tools in the policies in the dry run mode, which makes it difficult to develop those. You need to have high level of expertise. Next slide, please. Yeah, key rotation workflow is key rotation is a common security practice, sometimes mandated by internal security policies. At the moment, it is possible. It's been done with Guardian, but it's not a sort of first class functionality of Guardian. It's not something that's easy to do, and it's sort of workflow that is repeatable and avoiding all the various errors. So this ticket is about introducing that ease of maintenance, sort of compliance with internal security policy through enabling key rotation workflow. We've done quite a bit of refactoring to Guardian UI, preparing it to potentially many enhancements in the next phase if the community chooses that option. One that we've done already, we standardized it, for example, on one of the components library. However, it is possible and probably would be useful for external developers to contribute to Guardian if we were to create Guardian component library, like many other products out there, which then simplify, like a button that's standard for Guardian and a radio button, so on. So adding new pages to Guardian by external developers would be much easier then, because you wouldn't have to navigate, do that at the lower levels of the code. So this ticket is about this. It's a significant amount of work, but probably will pay off in the longer term. Next phase, please, Prina. No, next slide, please, not phase. Yes, yeah, this has been requested by the community, is the ability to choose whether to execute some API calls synchronously or asynchronously. At the moment, all API calls are executed asynchronously. Basically, an API call returns the fact that it's kind of response to the call saying the execution started, but then you can't it's up to the calling application to then query for the status and so on. It might be useful for some applications where potentially, let's say, they just want to block and wait for the end of the execution chain and returning a value saying we finished or failed executing this. Sometimes they can fail, for example, if an account doesn't have enough H bar balance, then the Guardian has no way of executing a chain of operations if it requires a hedera transaction, for example. Next phase, please. Next slide. A very useful capability of being able to capture the execution. Many times we've used that already for debugging your policies sometimes when there are issues, because it enables this exchange of your kind of data and ease of replay and seeing it. Sometimes some policies are so complex, it's quite difficult to provide the full set of values to trigger that specific issue in the policy during policy development. Currently, this capability only works in a dry run mode. What would be useful is to be able to replay the data as have been published by policies before, because they're all available. So you could, for example, capture the data from the policies that's been published and replay it in your dry run, or replay it and publish on the testnet and see how it looks and so on. So it's just an enhancement to this functionality. Next slide, please. Yes, it's a kind of more lower level ticket, but we use for block properties, we use decorators, which is maybe not ideal because it's just not recommended. Maybe not, it's not that it's not recommended, but it's not the best practice in this context potentially. So we would like to change that, but this requires significant amount of work. So if the community authorizes this, it'd be great. But if not, we'll move it to the next phase, the phase after next. So next slide, please, Prina. Yeah, in version 3 of Guardian, we've introduced previously in version 2, we had a schema diagram. It was static. It was a bit, I don't know, it wasn't color coded. It was just a diagram of schema and a relationship in the schema. In version 3, we've introduced statistics. We've introduced, I think it was only for statistics that we introduced, obviously we introduced other methods, but they don't touch. Oh no, we do. For parameterizations as well, we use the same sort of components, very powerful, dynamic, tree-like view of relationship between schemas. It allows you to, by selecting the particular schema on the right-hand side, it displays all attributes. You could filter, you could search attributes. It's basically a very powerful interactive thing. So it'd be good to reuse, but it needs to change and be enhanced to be useful in the context of just browsing schema dependencies. So we would like to undertake that work if you authorize it. So next phase, please. Yeah, so that came from some of the community. Previously, it's been thoroughly discussed. In essence, this is the ticket to just narrow it down. This is the ticket about the ability to maintain multiple kind of login sessions under the same credentials, which they are independent, which requires significant changes, I think, to Guardian internally, because basically it needs to be not multi-threading, those are not threads, but multiple activities happening at the same time. You creating policy, using policy needs to be safe for this, so it needs to be some coordination, synchronization introduced. So this ticket is about giving users, changing the Guardian accordingly, making it safe for multiple concurrent sessions by the same user under the same login credentials, so you can open many tabs and have different views and the tabs don't interfere with each other. Next slide, please, Prina. Yes, we had introduced many mechanisms already, building blocks to enable that kind of analysis, but it still requires further kind of enhancements and joining it all together. So we've got policy diff, we've got tagging, just tagging concept, we've got policy data comparison to the same project executed under different policies, the same data. You can compare the outcomes or different projects. And there's this capabilities in Guardian to do analytics, but it doesn't join into sort of reputational structure of some sort that industry recognizes and Guardian community recognizes and uses. So this ticket is about advancing and joining all of this together into that system. Next phase, please, slide, please, not phase. Token rectification architecture. Yes, so we currently Guardian supports revocation of everything, all the documents and the chain of documents that depend on the document that's been revoked. All of them get revoked, but we discussed multiple times with the community, but haven't arrived to a conclusion of what needs to happen with the tokens. Because when a particular document is revoked, maybe on the basis of this document, some tokens have been issued, which were also subsequently sold and resold, packaged, and maybe even retired. And now this document is revoked. All the chain of the documents is revoked. What do we do with the tokens? They've been sold to somebody who's at no fault. They had to believe that everything was okay when they bought it, and maybe retired some of the. Yeah, this ticket is about solving this problem. We would have to work with the community to figure out how to approach that as well. Previously, we saw a couple of UI targeting tickets, right? We had the new component library. We had like just a collection of enhancements to the UI. This is another approach, another way of looking at it. Maybe we should redesign the Guardian UI significantly. We've enhanced it already. We've done one reorg, and Guardian UI now is much better looking, at least visually, than it was maybe a year ago or so. But it is possible to rethink many of the concepts that we've introduced into the Guardian, and we are not sure that the community would want it. Maybe they would, because obviously rethinking Guardian UI would probably make it easier for new users potentially, but users who got used to the Guardian UI as it is now will find it, there would be a need to adjust and find the same functions potentially that are hidden or changed, gone somewhere else. And I don't know, but yeah, it's up to you, the community, to decide whether we should do that or not. So please comment on this. Next slide, please, Prina. So at the moment, we have one part of the token lifecycle is handled by the Guardian, is revocation, but there are many other operations that can happen on token. And at the moment, Guardian and policy has no say. Potentially, it might be useful to introduce that capability into Guardian. It doesn't have to be used. Maybe there are no restrictions for token lifecycle, who can have it, and so on. But at the moment, the tokens can be transferred to whoever, to any account, for example. If maybe you would want an account verified somehow, or anything, basically. There are many use cases I can think of that this would be useful. So at the moment, there's no facility in policy or otherwise to configure this through Guardian. Next slide, please. Another limitation of the current visuals in Guardian is the ability to show policy versions. So policy obviously is not static, and policy being developed, and new versions get published, and Guardian internally tracks this, but it doesn't show it that conveniently to the user. And maybe sometimes users don't want to know, but if your certain tokens have been issued by the old version of the policy and now the others by the new version of the policy, maybe that is a useful information to see, and it's not that easy to see it in Guardian, and certainly in the trust chain in particular. Next slide, please. Yes. So the other limitation of the current revocation architecture is that policy chaining is not supported in the revocation. So if you were to issue VCs that then consumed by another policy and issues VCs, when one of the VCs gets revoked, there's no method of propagating that revocation all the way across all these linked policies. So this ticket is dedicated to fixing this issue. Yes. Yeah, another enhancement that is targeted to policy authors. And many of the elements in the policy and errors that humans make when configuring the policy could be preventable. One way to approach that is the wizards for blocks, as we discussed a little earlier, but there are others. Maybe if you're using an element that has been deprecated, policy can suggest maybe don't use it for a new policy because its lifetime is 3, maybe 6 months, and then you would have to upgrade. Maybe some of the logic errors that you've made because you can choose if then else and complex various structures and get lost in those, and some of the chunks of policy that you think will be executed wouldn't be, and so on. There's just many others. Versioning as well, of course, for modules, for tools, for policy and policy chaining, potentially, all that. A guardian could warn authors and that way prevent some of the issues at runtime. So next slide, please, Prina. Yes, there's not much discussion that we need to do this. Make it compatible with the standard of hedera. So hedera wallets would display it correctly. It's more or less compatible, but there's certain things that are missing there. The only question is what is the priority of this task? And up to you, the community, to tell us that. Next slide, please. Yes, this is an improvement to just making it more flexible, the Guardian UI and correspondingly API. There are different other, so there've been requirements from the field coming to introduce other status options and states for those buttons, and obviously there's no flexibility currently in Guardian to support that. So the ticket, if we were to implement it, would resolve this issue and give that flexibility. Next slide, please. So at present, there's no such thing as oracles for Guardian specifically. Oracles are usually used to bring off-chain information on-chain. And as you can imagine, Guardian operation all the way until a token is minted is off-chain technically. Yes, it's anchored on chain. It's also safe because we use blockchain related technology, verifiable credentials to record data. So the signatures that can be verified, the authenticity of the data, and every time something is produced and published, that fact is recorded on blockchain. So you know that with the link, so you know where to look for, and you can go all the way, and it's verifiable, but it is still off chain technically. So sometimes in the future, I'd expect some applications, third-party applications, maybe decentralized exchanges, maybe some other things may require access to some of that information in the smart contracts, but the information is stored off-chain. Only the anchors are stored on-chain, like the links to the data, but the data is an IPFS, which a blockchain, a smart contract has no access to. So this could be solved by introducing oracles. We could do that and then attest and verifiably attest on-chain to a certain information, like publishing some, I don't know, something that's maybe commercially relevant. Yeah, so this ticket is about that. Next slide, please, Prina. Next ticket that we've introduced is we are using an open source alternative in the index maps, but the Guardian itself still uses Google Maps, and Google Maps is inconvenient, particularly for the open source projects, because this API token expires and then it looks horrible. We would like to change that to basically standardize Guardian on the open source mapping. Next slide, please, Prina. Yes, so Index has been introduced. It's kind of an MVP. It allows you to find and display information, but there are quite a few things that could be done to the indexer to improve it. And I think there will be another ticket about manually forcing a limited refresh of the indexer later on. But this ticket is a collection of enhancements both visual and functional enhancement to the indexer that we could do. So if you are a heavy user of the indexer and or your users, your clients are, please vote for this. It would be a next step in the indexer evolution. Next slide, please, Prina. Yes, at the moment, Guardian supports a very limited conversational abilities between users, right? So the only time really it's got messages, but there's no way, not not messages, it's got notifications, but there's no way to send messages with Guardian. Suddenly attached to actions, for example. The only way where you could do that is when you reject something, you could put a reason for rejection. So we can enhance this. We can enable basically a comment for every operation, or maybe even a comment response, a thread conversation where humans operating Guardian UI could come to an agreement about something, or so one can explain to the other and ask questions and so on. So a conversation would be useful. At the moment, it needs to be done off Guardian, but we can do it on Guardian. Also, not only we can do it on Guardian, we can record that conversation, we can publish it, we can attest to the authenticity. For example, if somebody's potentially, it's up to obviously whether it's useful or not, it remains to be seen, but it's a possibility with Guardian. So when you are, for example, developing a standard or policy, industry policy or industry standard, sometimes these comments need to be managed and the company needs to attest that it has responded to every comment from the industry when it's an industry consultation period, for example. So something like that we can implement here in Guardian with this feature. Next slide, please. At the moment, Guardian contains wealth of data, and that data is published in IPFS in JSON, but sometimes it could be useful to maybe for presentation or for analytics purposes or some other purposes to get that data into something like Excel maybe, or some statistical programs and so on. And it requires another step, a complex step of navigating the tree of data, all these messages. So it would have been useful, or would be useful, if Guardian implemented the capability where you can export all data as it relates to a particular element, project, for example, particular policy, the entire set of data, and maybe or in a document, but in a different format, immediately importable. CSV seems to be like the main format that for that. Yeah, that's the ticket. Many of you are aware that there is an IWA group that is developing various standards, and we try to stay compatible with those standards. Ticket is about improving that situation. We could develop metadata that is specifically and make it default or mandatory for that is compatible with a particular standard or standards published by IWA, maybe other bodies as well. So it requires obviously some work, and this is for your consideration here. Next slide, please. But we have had a case on the field, in the field, that there was a very large number of MRVs submitted through Guardian, and that case, fortunately, was successful. It was a very large number, but not a humongous number. But we started thinking about the humongous numbers, for example, like RFIDs or something like that, where there are billions of RFIDs and the number is increasing. And if you wanted to track all of them individually, whether it's possible to handle that volume. It's small data set, but there's a lot of that, whether it's possible to handle this with the current technology in Guardian and storage and hedera and otherwise, and how would we do this? So this ticket is about investigating and implementing that solution. If your use case requires large numbers of MRVs, please reach out to us. Next slide, please. And this is maybe not really a prod feature, but more like a test/convenience feature, but also can be used in other circumstances. Testnet on Hedera undergoes reset regularly. Sometimes those resets are postponed or cancelled, but the idea is that it's going to be reset every quarter. So anything you publish on the testnet will disappear. In IPFS, it'll stay because IPFS is production by default, but all the index of what's in IPFS, all the data in messaging, in messages on Hedera, all the tokens that you create on the testnet, it's just for the testnet, not mainnet, will disappear, which makes it inconvenient to debug and test if you developing a policy and it takes longer than 3 months. You have to adjust for this. It's possible to solve this with Guardian. Guardian still, your Guardian instance still contains all the data because it caches the data that it publishes externally. It contains all that data in the database, and theoretically, it can go and republish it. It's not that simple because this data has IDs. IDs are generated by Hedera, for example, so it would need to resubmit because these IDs are embedded in the documents that are signed. So if you were to change the ID of the document that you link this document to, which now has a new ID because it's just been then you'd have to re-sign it and so on. So there's quite a bit of work to do, but it's possible, it's feasible to implement a solution where you can just it's been reset and then a testnet, and you can republish everything and you start working with your Guardian like no reset has happened. Yeah, so that's the feature. I think that's our plan for today.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Andre. All right. So as we committed that we will be going over 40 topics in today's session. So we have covered 40 topics, and if you have any feedback or any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We will be again presenting the next 40 items in our next Wednesday meeting. So thank you so much for your time, guys, and we are already on time. I think this is the first time we haven't extended our session. So thank you so much, Andre, for your time and your effort. And really glad to get you guys on this. And we are hoping to see you guys in another part of this session, which would be next Wednesday, same time at 11 a.m. But the thing is, please do register for our second session. You will find the link in our Slack channel. I would be pinning that up again so that you don't miss it. And please make sure that you don't join the regular tech meeting, the Wednesday tech meeting for our next week so that you can join our part 2 session. And as always, feel free to reach out to us on Slack channel if you have any questions on any of these topics what we have reached. And yeah, thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much. We will be again meeting up next week. Thank you.